Now, the rest of the story. Francis Pharcellus Church was a hard-boiled journalist of the old school. It was in his blood. His daddy had founded the New York Chronicle. His brother was a newspaper man, a New York Times correspondent during the Civil War. Francis Church saw reality up close on a daily basis and reported it faithfully as such. Life does not come sugar-coated, Francis learned as a young man. He persistently refused to characterize it thus for his readers. You see what we have here, the makings of a perfect curmudgeon. For as the years passed from wartime to peacetime and the beat shifted from a battleground to a safe, secure desk, the glint in the eye and the fire in the belly gradually diminished to a squint over the spectacles and a third-rate case of chronic dyspepsia. No, his passion for the truth never subsided. It simply took on the guise of cynicism after a while. By the autumn of 1897, Francis Pharcellus Church, boy reporter, was 58 years old. A 20-year veteran editorial writer for the New York Sun, whose tolerance for the frivolous had long since dropped to zero. In his editorials, Mr. Church preferred to comment on religious topics, which he often treated with considerable skepticism. The more controversial the subject, the more Mr. Church seemed to relish it. And so it was perhaps with that in mind that his managing editor, Edward P. Mitchell, presented him with that particular letter on that particular September afternoon. Mr. Church's response to his superior was something like, "You've got to be joking." But Mr. Mitchell was quite serious. "Please answer this for tomorrow's edition," he said. And Mr. Church, bristling, returned reluctantly to his desk, and he began writing. What happened to him between the moment he started that editorial and the moment he finished is anybody's guess. Something must have. For you see, Francis Pharcellus Church wrote something utterly uncharacteristic in that day. In a sense, if only for 400 words or so, he became somebody that he was not. And yet those words comprise his only legacy as a journalist, and they remain the only reason that anybody is at all curious about him nearly 100 years later. His editorial, September 21, 1897, was unsigned. In fact, it was not until after he died in 1906 that he became publicly known as the author. But now you will never forget the no-nonsense newspaper man named Francis Pharcellus Church, because of a solitary, glaring inconsistency in his otherwise grimly logical career. Mr. Church never had children of his own, and yet in spite of his sardonic self, he was to make glad the hearts of childhood for countless millions of all ages, especially in this season of the year. For once upon a time, a little girl on the brink of disillusionment wrote to the New York Sun, seeking an honest answer to a sincere question, and Francis Church wrote an editorial reply, which has echoed down through all of the generations since, saying in essence, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, and now you know the rest of the story."
And now, the rest of the story. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. That phrase has entered our popular culture. But how? Behind me is the childhood home of Virginia O'Hanlon. A plaque mounted between the windows of her childhood home tells her story. Laura Virginia O'Hanlon was born on July the 20th, 1889 in New York City to Philip O'Hanlon, a surgeon and consultant for the New York Police Department. Virginia was named after her mother, Laura Virginia Plum O'Hanlon. Sometime during the summer of 1897, little Virginia began to ask her father questions about Santa Claus. She was not satisfied when her father was a little evasive on the subject. There was a habit in the family that whenever any doubt came up as to how to pronounce a word or some question about a historical fact, they would write to the question and answer column in the Sun. Little Virginia told her father, "Well, I'm just going to write to the Sun and find out the real truth." He replied, "Go ahead, Virginia, I'm sure the sun will give you the right answer, as it always does. Well, little Virginia dashed off this letter. Dear editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street. Little Virginia waited eagerly for a reply. She waited so long for that response that she forgot all about it. But on Tuesday morning, September 21st, 1897, Virginia finally got her answer. Papa O'Hanlon was thumbing through the newspaper and was reading an article about the newly invented chainless bicycles, which would revolutionize travel. No longer would women's dresses get tangled in or snagged by bicycle chains. No longer would riders have to stop to tighten their chains. It was similar to the drive shaft in cars, but it never caught on. Over a century later, we still have chains on our bicycles. Once Papa O'Hanlon had finished reading about the chainless bicycle, he found Virginia's answer in the form of this newspaper column entitled, Is There a Santa Claus? He read it and quickly summoned little Virginia. Now can you imagine little Virginia's excitement as she read? Your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant in his intellect, as compared with the boundless world about him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to our life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus! It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not to believe in Santa Claus, you might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus, but even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders that are unseen and unseeable in the world. You tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside. But there is a veil covering the unseen world which not the strongest man, or even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived, could tear apart. Only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture the supernatural beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world there is nothing else as real and abiding. No Santa Claus? Thank God! He lives, and He lives forever. 1,000 years from now, maybe 10 times 10,000 years from now, He will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. Little Virginia was thrilled. She believed. According to her family, little Virginia continued to believe for the rest of her life. She earned a bachelor's degree, then a master's degree, became a teacher, then a principal. Throughout her lifetime, people wrote to her about her letter to the Sun and the famous reply. She always replied and sent along a fine copy of that editorial. Francis Church expected few people to read the article and thought no one would remember it. But that little article, now commonly referred to as Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus, has become the most reprinted newspaper editorial in the whole English language. It has been adapted as television specials, film, a musical, and numerous books. It's been translated into multiple languages. The Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus editorial entered our pop culture because it is a renewal of faith, but not just a child's faith. Over time, each of us gets bogged down in the daily grind of our hustle and bustle world. If we're not careful, we can lose our faith. Many people believe only what they can see. I once had a friend who was determined that angels and spirits did not exist just because he couldn't see them. What about the very air that we breathe? We can't see it, but without it, we couldn't exist. What about radiation? We can't see it, but it has the power to kill us. What are some other things that we can't see, but we know they exist? Now there's a family I need to mention here. During each Christmas Eve celebration, Sarah Rogers and her children, who are now grown, gather at her home in Tucson, Arizona. Sarah reads aloud the letter that 8-year-old Virginia wrote to the son. Then she reads the reply. Sarah is continuing a tradition that her parents did, and their parents did as well. This is a tradition that goes back more than 120 years in Sarah's family. You see, little Virginia O'Hanlon, that 8-year-old girl who wrote the letter asking if there was a Santa Claus, was Sarah Rogers' great-grandmother. I'm Brad Dison, wishing you a happy and healthy holiday, a Merry Christmas, surrounded by family and friends. And now you know the rest of the story.